Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Carlton People. Now, today we're going to meet a new-ish friend that I've made over the journey. Her name is Analia. Hello.
Hello, Terry. Nice to see your face.
It's been a little time coming, but we're here. I think
Yeah.
once I spoke to Frankie, it just felt like the timing was right. So here we are.
As always, trust the timing.
Absolutely. You would be one of the more unique stories, I think, when it comes to how you became a Carlton person, which I'm kind of aware of, but I haven't fully
Yeah,
unpacked it with you.
yeah,
So I'm very keen to get stuck into this.
yeah. It is. I said in the message. I think nobody else will have my story.
That's exactly what we're trying to achieve here. So please enlighten us. How did you become a Carlton supporter?
Well, originally I grew up in New South Wales, so AFL was always very foreign to me. I never really understood it. When I moved to Melbourne, the first thing I got asked, I was working at a cafe on Swanston Street, and like my first interaction with a Melbourne person was, "Who's your team?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" And then, of course, I started asking people who should I support, and everyone was actually leaning towards Essendon back then, but it
Hmm.
was of no interest to me. So I just went about my life. And then last year is when I became a Carlton supporter, and I had been on this kind of journey researching, like, kind of for what I do for work, which is like emotional and spiritual health advising. And I was in this rabbit hole about masculine energy and feminine energy, and the incredible points of misunderstanding and difference inside of that space. And so I'd, obviously being a woman, I've been down the feminine side of it, and I really understood it. And I was trying to get a handle on masculine energy and how it's so different. And I would have started having these conversations with Frankie about it, who's got an incredible brain for all of those sorts of things and has so much information. And we just started talking about it. And he was really in the height of his Carlton passion. And so it sort of was coming up through there, some of the things that he enjoyed about it that he thought were relevant for masculine energy, like the camaraderie of fans, like being able to go to a game and really kind of express yourself through masculine energy, and the whole thing really being quite powerful. And we sort of started talking about that. And then he started telling me about some of the background of Carlton. And of course, I've come in and they had just started their streak of winning. And so when he was like, "They've just started their streak of winning," I was like, "Oh, yeah, sure. Okay. Like all teams do that." And he was like, "No." And then gave me the history of how long it had been and how much everyone had struggled. And we sort of started looking at their story. And so through this kind of window of masculine energy, I saw this like whole evolutionary story play out throughout the whole team and the fan base. And it actually, if I ever wrote it down, which I am working on, it's one of the most incredible stories of evolution of energy that you can see. And I know I've said this to you, and I say this to everybody attached to Carlton, it's more than football. Carlton are more than football. And so then I started getting really kind of into their whole story and how you could see it play out, from that Essendon game where everyone was really down and really in a really negative energy space, and just seeing that whole thing come to culmination this year was quite magical, because that whole journey of people reaching this different level of unconditional love and support for the team. And so then I just, for funsies, because I do birth charts, and Frankie had been talking about tipping teams. And I said to him, "I bet you I can use astrology and do tipping for the AFL pretty successfully." And he kind of laughed at me because he wasn't super, like, wasn't a huge believer. And I was like, "Okay." And so I sat down and I have a spreadsheet, because I love a spreadsheet, of all of the birth charts of all of the players. as best I can get. I don't have time of birth or place of birth, but as best I can get, I've got them all. And I started doing tipping based on the overall astrological energy of the team and each player and the energy of the universe, and started tipping. And I've got about an 85% hit rate. Sometimes I get them all correct. Um, and it's the story of Carlton that plays out through that as well is incredible. The individuals in that, their journeys alone from their birth charts is incredible. And so I started going to games because I wanted to feel the energy inside of the stadium, and just am obsessed with the whole entire story of Carlton, what they represent to their fans, what their fans represent to the world. And the whole thing is just magic to me. It's way more than football.
It is magic. It truly is. I
Yeah.
mean, we're filming this, on the 3rd of July, 2024, and last night we sat here with, 720
It was
odd people
incredible.
live watching tweets of one of the
Yeah.
players go through a tribunal.
Yeah.
The level of care that we all have for this club is
Yep.
just, it never ceases to amaze me. And I've supported the club as far as my memory serves me. So I can only imagine when you know, had your light bulb moment, like, oh my
Yeah.
God, like what is
Yeah.
going on here? This is truly something
Yeah.
magical.
Absolutely. And like last year, when I was really kind of getting back into looking at all of the things that I'd missed, and came across this idea of like the curse, because the curse has always got me as someone who's a little bit of a witch. I always kind of giggled a bit at every single AFL team having their like, oh, we're cursed, we can't do this. And so that was a moment for me where I really got involved, because I was like, okay, that's it. I'm getting to the bottom of this whole curse saga. Who's got a real curse and whose is just made up? And so
Yeah.
I started doing all of this research, and of course, I found the curse that you and I have talked about, the First Nations tribe put on John Elliott, and just tracked everything from there and the energy attached to it. And it's the only one. There's one other one that I need to look into, but out of all of the curses that I could find, it was like it's a real, like somebody actually said curse words over a person who was attached to the Carlton energy. And so following that and tracking that, and like it all kind of coming to an end when Vossi stepped in, like there's no more proof. I needed no more proof after that, that something magical and very important, like Carlton stands for something very important on a spiritual and an energy level. And I don't
Yeah.
think a lot of people inside of it recognize that. But from my perspective, they are something else. There's something else about them, about everybody attached to it, fans, everyone who does their own, podcasts and stuff, everybody involved, everybody is magic.
Have you always been into your spirituality, astrology? Is this something that's just been with you from childhood?
I've always, I've got memories of being very young, of like doing witchy stuff with my sister, and, sort of always doing it for a little bit of fun. And like The Craft was like my favorite movie, and still probably would be if I had to pick one. And I sort of kind of let it go and did kind of the growing up thing, and and then just before COVID, I started really feeling called towards kind of doing some self introspection, as I think a lot of people did around that time.
Yeah.
And then, we all got locked down. We all got locked in a house with ourselves and all of the noise that we had to do introspection about. And energy wise, that was very important for this shift of collective mindset. And so during that time, a friend of mine who I was living with was very much into reading the daily, what my zodiac says for the day. And I was never into that. And so I got annoyed with her and was like, that's it. You know what? I'm very good at this, and I'm going to prove to you that none of this is real. And so I started this journey of trying to prove to her that astrology wasn't real, that it was all
Mm.
made up. And what I found was the complete opposite of that. And got so deep inside of doing my own birth chart and other people around me's birth chart, that like that is a map that is helpful for growth, for self-introspection, for the evolution of people. And I continue down that rabbit hole, and I've said from the start that it's a rabbit hole that I will continue down until it tells me that it's wrong or I find something that's not accurate, and I'm yet to find that. And I started working this year in a shop in Malvern at it's called Oracle of Crystals, where I read tarot and I do birth charts for people. And on top of, I was just doing them kind of like this through video calls mostly for people, or sending out just a written document to them. But sitting in front of somebody and reading their birth chart to them and seeing how it changes their lives, like it is who I am, and it is my purpose here, is to help
That's
people
great.
through that. Yeah.
Wow, wow. I mean, not often do I get to talk to people who are so sure about what their purpose is. So that's really cool to hear you express that the way you just did.
Yeah, it's I've searched for something that's been helping people for probably most of my life. I worked as a personal trainer. I got kind of there helping people. And I always had I was always the personal trainer that used to get in trouble off the boss, because my whole mission was to get somebody empowered enough to be able to train themselves, to not have
Mm,
to keep coming back and seeing me. And of course, they don't like that when you're supposed to be selling yourself. And so I guess I just always kept kind of searching. And I've always been that person to do self introspection and kind of look at my stuff and try and figure out what it means and where the power in it is, and how I can make a difference to myself, to how I view the world. And I hadn't really considered that that was something that I could do for other people until I started kind of mucking around and being like, oh, hey, let me do your birth chart. I'm really kind of into astrology, and really seeing the power that that has to just, even if it's just validating the way that you are, validating. And like, my specialty is kind of really getting into the dark stuff and the placements that represent where we kind of hold trauma and where that comes from, because that's our greatest power. Our greatest power is always hidden in those spaces. And
mm,
it's my kind of specialty with birth charts to get into that space. So I do have really close kind of connections with people when I am doing their birth chart, because I'm talking about some really heavy stuff. And so seeing the other side of that and seeing people really feel validated and understand why they are the way that they are, and that gives them an opportunity to move forward in a different direction instead of just being reactionary, and knowing that that changed their life. There's no other way that I could see it not being my purpose.
love
I
that.
would, like, it just is. It feels correct for me.
No, I love it. I can certainly relate um, when it comes to this. I think before this all started, I went through that period of time in my life where living in another country, understood that I was testing new things that are what I wanted to do with my life. I kept asking myself the question, what would I do? What do I want to do? What kind of life do I want to live? And I really just broke it down simply. It's like, what would you do if, money was not an issue and you had unlimited resources? And the answer was always, I would watch Carlton and talk about Carlton. That's
Yeah.
that's what I would do. Like, that's what makes me the happiest, or that's what
Yeah.
makes me feel the most fulfilled. So I can certainly relate to that feeling of, doing what you feel your life's purpose is. And
Yeah.
I guess along the way, we've built this community and we've made friends online, some of which we've never met in real life, but we've got this
Yeah.
really innate connection over the course of the last few years. So I guess being such a new, say a new supporter, what would you say are your like core memories with the team's journey so far?
I mean, it has to be the first game that I ever went to,
Hmm.
which was the GWS game. It was the one that they lost last year. That was the
Right.
first live game that I went to. And I went specifically to feel the energy. I wanted to feel the energy. And like, I understood that, like, it didn't really matter if we won or lost. That was kind of part of it for me, that it didn't really matter if we won or lost, because we were going through anyway. And it was still an interesting experience with the energy, because I'd always kind of felt and seen in the story told this idea of the Carlton players being very deeply attached to the energy of the fans.
Mm.
And I remember watching that video of the fans being disgusted after that Essendon game. And it made me so sad, like feeling that, imagining how that would feel for the players to feel that sadness coming from their fans, the sadness coming from them, and that moment of kind of devastation. I know, and I will never unsee that video of them walking out and people yelling abuse down on them. And so there had always been in my mind this really deep connection. And I'd been watching your videos and I'd spoken to Pom at this time. Like, I found him, Frankie was like, oh, you need to watch this podcast, they're talking about something that you'll find interesting. And so I turned it on. It was like 1 o'clock in the morning or something. He'd just finished work, and I looked it up and I turned it on, and you were having this really amazing conversation. And I just said to Frankie, I need to talk to that man, find me his details. And he gave me Pom's details, and we ended up having this amazing conversation. And Pom shared with me a lot of that validated a lot of my feelings about the energy of the fans and the energy of the team being very attached. And so going to that game and feeling that, because it wasn't that I didn't get to feel that positive experience of, they were winning and everyone was uplifting each other. It was the opposite of that. It was like everyone was kind of in that weird space that everyone is in, that first part of kind of nervous and not knowing how to respond and kind of waiting to feel, what am I excited, what's happening. And then they were kind of doing well, so everyone was getting a little bit kind of up and about. And then it was as if, it's weird to explain, but it was as if when Carlton kind of realized that they could get injured. There was like, because I had said, because GWS are a really cheeky and aggressive team in their energy and in the way they play, in my opinion, watching them as well. And the energy of that game was like they were just going to go hard. And it was like there was a moment where you could almost feel that the team had gone, we're going to get injured. And we don't want that. Like, we've got this big thing, we owe it to our fans for next week. And it was almost as if they disconnected their energy from the fans because they knew the fans were about to be disappointed in what they were going to do. And so the energy of the whole stadium just kind of collapsed a little. And it wasn't like no one was angry or anything, but it was like flat. And the game continued and it did what it did, and on they went. And that experience was like, it was a negative version of it, but it was proof to me how connected those energies are, and how now being two games where they have won and feeling that difference, feeling the two things come together and really lift each other up, like, I'll still never forget that negative experience. And I can't even imagine what that felt like when they were on their streak of losing.
Yeah.
And how hard that must have been for the team to pull themselves out of that space, because they obviously have to start, right? They have to start. They've got to give the fans something to unconditionally love. And how they managed to pull themselves out of that space, knowing how disappointed everybody was, to now be on this path that they are on, is just, it's that whole concept of like the phoenix, right? Burning something to the ground and coming out new. And they're such huge proof of that. And like I've always said, like Daddy Voss, his energy, the way that it matches the team dynamic is magic. And he definitely, the part that he plays in that, in the way that he is able to be very strong, but very nurturing, I think, is what it would have taken to pull them out of that energy of knowing they disappointed everybody. And so
It's
I
so
think that that's incredible.
it is a fascinating story with Voss because, I mean, everyone, it feels like everyone had to go through, it
Mhm.
being the, is it a burden? It's a privilege to have the fan base that we do because of how passionate we are. But it's also a burden because we're talking about generational frustration. We're
Yeah.
talking about decades of disappointment being thrown onto a new generation of players who, fortunately or unfortunately, fairly or unfairly, feel this brunt of frustration from a version of the Carlton Football Club that existed before they even played their first game of football.
Yeah.
And so getting through that was always going to be a challenge. And I guess where we are today, we're filming this ahead of round 17, 2024. Don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I definitely feel this, like, it's unquestionable now. Like the tide has turned. They've
Mhm.
found something. Now, what it's going to eventuate into has yet to happen. But I'm just still noticing the lingering effects of that
Yeah.
footy frustration, footy trauma,
Mhm.
if you want to call it. And it's kind of got me thinking lately. I mean, we're talking about that frustration spilling over, and it's like if you just look at how the players apply themselves now, I
Yeah.
don't know if you can really be that mad at them. Like we might lose this week, we might lose a final. I don't know, but the way in which they apply themselves, I don't think can be questioned the way it used to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, I went back and watched some of your older fan cams because I was trying to get an idea of the journey of the fans and the way that people talked about it when they were in their loss. Like they talked about this whole concept of heartbreak, like heartbreak. And because I came into this the whole Carlton journey from this masculine energy perspective, I had a very hard opinion about it, about the idea of what a lot of feminine energy and women fail to understand is that the relationship of a man and the football team is a long-term relationship. And I would always get frustrated hearing these stories of people being like, oh, he had the footy on at my wedding day or at my friend's wedding, these sorts of ideas, or like he's gone out with the footy. And so I always had this belief being like, no, like that's a long-term relationship. Like what you're talking about, that's a generational long-term relationship that exists usually before a partner is even around. And so having that, seeing them talk about it from that, like, it broke my heart. People saying they had to stop watching it because they were heartbroken. To like that energy, being in that amount of sadness, because of the connection to like a sport, like to a sport. And like what you're saying, like that makes so much sense that like it's generational sadness, but with hope behind it. And I think that the whole fan base has had to experience this, particularly because it feels like a changing of the guard. And astrologically, the energy is this changing of the guard energy from the old way to the new way, from a way of being in kind of fear and disappointment into this energy of a more collective mentality of understanding how our energy affects somebody else's. Whereas the old energy was kind of more about you follow the rules and everyone's happy. And this new energy is not about that. This new energy is about being yourself and finding a way for that to shine so that we all understand each other. And when you look at the old fan mentality of, always finding a way to be negative because of this generational sadness and trauma related to it, and it is hard to shake that off. And so it's like almost 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, because and the journey last year was very much about that. It was like we're winning, and then we have a loss. And then, half the people would drop into that where, well, this is exactly what I expected. We're terrible again. But the other half wouldn't. They would stay, no, you know what? They're doing really well. We're on the right path. And I think the more that it went along, the more you could see there were more people jumping onto that, being like, you know what, something has changed. And definitely this year, the shift that has happened, I think, was very obvious. And that's probably another one of my memories actually, was that Collingwood game. Like I couldn't get tickets to it, so I watched it at home, and I did the astrology for that very hard because I was very interested in the timing of it and where it appeared. And it appeared in a weekend that we were sort of told to learn from our enemy, to find the positives in your enemy's behavior and take that on board in your own way, make it your own. And, Collingwood is a very ego-based team. They're all very ego-based. They also seem to play for themselves, but there's an understanding that everyone plays for themselves, and that makes them one. Everyone has a space for their ego, and that's what they need. And so that makes them very aggressive. And Carlton are more like we all play together, and it's inside of togetherness that we each have a spot. And
Mm.
that's very important for them. And as their journey continues, it just becomes more and more important. And so that weekend that Collingwood played Carlton, it was as if Collingwood did the learn from your enemy, right? They really seemed to pay attention to how they needed to move more as one in order to predict what was going to happen. And Carlton were just a little bit hesitant at learning from the enemy. And it reminded me of that first GWS game that I went to where I was like, they're not aggressive enough. Like, they need to learn that aggression. But they needed to learn it from that perspective of how do we come at that aggression from one as one. And so it was like, and I was like, if they don't learn the lesson, they're not going to win. If they don't do it, they're not going to win. And of course, Collingwood did it. They did what they were supposed to do with that energy. They learnt the lesson. They played exactly how they needed to play, and they won. And then the couple of games after that, it was like you could see Carlton kind of readjusting themselves and kind of coming to this idea that this kind of aggression and this sort of hard, cheeky kind of ego playing, it wasn't their thing, but that they had to find their thing that had that energy. And that last game, like, you can see it. You could see it in them, that the uplifting kind of place of where they had allowed that ego to be a little bit cheeky. And that understanding that their aggression coming from that place and not coming from trying to be, dirty players or anything, but from that confidence in everyone being on the same level. And so it's like they have learnt that lesson, and they have seemed to have done that with so many games this year. The ones that they've lost, which I've said, like, when they've lost a game this year, it's like Daddy Voss is like, here is my gold, because everything about them that's good, and I know Pom always says it when we chat, like, you never learn anything unless you make a mistake, right? And so it's like the way that Daddy Voss looks at that loss, and I've read interviews where they say, they can't tell in the way that they get spoken to by the coaches whether they've won or lost, basically. But
Yeah.
in that loss, it's like he goes, excellent. Now I know what to fix. And then they seem to do that. And I've watched every single game that they've come out of a loss, something new has appeared. Something different has appeared in their energy. And like that first one with Collingwood was like almost like a mind opening, in my opinion, where they were like, something's missing. Something's missing. And
Yeah.
then they've tracked that into this place now of like, just taking little bits of things from the team that they have lost against and making it their own, making it inside of that safe space of a team, figuring out what that looks like for them and being able to really embody that. And that's stunning.
Yeah. I would say some of the themes that I've seen after hearing you speak about what you just did. So I think trust is a big one that's come up a lot this year for me. They seem to have a better trust of each other and their
Mhm.
roles. And I see that happen when I see a role like Chincotta's evolve, or Zach Williams evolve from, defense to forward, or, young 19-year-old Lockie Cowan being trusted
Yeah.
on the last line of defense. And that's probably started to really emerge after the big Sydney loss. And then after that trust started becoming a feature, then we started seeing this new expression, like these handball chains with a bit of
Mhm.
flair, not too much, but a little bit of flair. I
Yeah.
think we started really seeing that against Essendon, and it kind of, with that, when we do it, when we score off turnover, and it's a little Harlem Globetrottery. Um,
Yes.
it's starting to unlock a new energy in the crowd because it's
Yeah.
entertaining, but it doesn't
Yeah.
happen unless you get that full collective trust first.
Mhm.
So that's really interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And like and the fans are on the same journey, right? The fans are on the same, like, individually we're all on the same journey. The fans as a collective are on the same journey as the players as a collective are on, as the whole entire AFL is on, in my opinion, if I go all the way back and look at the oneness. And the energy that we're dealing with inside of the eclipse cycle that we're in now, which started in April last year and will end in April next year, the way that those dates line up with a lot of the things that have happened are pretty magical. And one of the energies involved in this whole eclipse energy is Aries, and Aries being that overall energy of the AFL. And so this year, the amount of change that is coming about within the AFL that is sort of unpredictable in a way, because we look at eclipses in astrology as fated but unpredictable. So we know when they're coming, we know something that is going to happen, but we don't know what it is. And the purpose of it is to align with the universal energy. And so as we see some of these teams, in my opinion, be getting the karma for not learning the lessons, for not, like, and I know I've got a bit of a vendetta against Coy Paka,
I
but
do like this. I'm a big fan of this.
but Coy Paka and his birth chart, which I have been through very, very deeply, he is somebody who thinks that he can get away with everything. And he's very talented. He's very fast. His mind is very fast. His mind, his body, his whole entire spirit runs off the same energy. And it's the energy of being very fast. But it's also the energy that puts him into a place of ego and thinking that he can get away with stuff and not really having a compass that tells him that he's gone too far. And so as I've watched Melbourne's journey and poor old Petrarca, my instant thing was like, you needed to lose a team member and you didn't choose for that to be Coy Paka. And he sets their whole, because they have the same energy as Carlton. Their base energy is the same. And so it's, if you look at those two teams as examples of who's learning the lesson and who is not, you can very clearly see that one team is learning the lesson. And so I'm like, well, I mean, you had to lose a team member. And the way that the energy of the universe goes is we'll just take one. You didn't choose, so we'll take one. And so now they've lost this more kind of positive, uplifting member because, in my opinion, they haven't chosen to reprimand somebody who needs to be reprimanded. And so when you look at the way that Carlton have learnt their lessons and how they continue to get this positive energy, this positive growth inside of this eclipse cycle, it's like everyone gets given the lesson. You choose to do the right thing or the wrong thing. You do the wrong thing, you get the karma. And so I don't think Melbourne are going to be anywhere near a final. I don't think they will have learnt the lesson by then. And I think they will continue to have really kind of unexpected moments happen. And there's, in the eclipse in particular, is the next one is on the 18th of September. So inside of that window between the 18th of September and like the 8th of October, there's an eclipse at one end and an eclipse at the other. And inside of that is where you get this unexpected energy happening. And it's the culmination of an energy of collective, of relationship. And so the teams that will prevail in the finals will be ones who work together as a collective, whose collective fan base are also in a positive energy. So every time you and Pom are talking about be positive, I'm like, that is the key here. That is the key here, because the way that we are inside of this mirroring energy is, as a collective, the power of our energy can turn tides here.
Certainly
That's how
see
the
it.
universe is listening.
Certainly feel it. I think at the back end of last year, I had never experienced that oneness with the fan base before. There's always been, in my experience, and having really gone down the rabbit hole of Carlton fandom for over 6 years now, there's always been this gap between the generations that watched flags and the generations who didn't and listened to the stories, and there was this gap. And in that gap, I saw for the first time it close up because we all were behind the team. Now, fair enough, we didn't have a reason to be behind the team collectively, but there was probably I would say like a 4 to 5 week period where I was like, wow, we are all on the same page. I think we are starting to see that a little bit more now, particularly after we've won 5 in a row. Winning obviously helps with belief, particularly when you're talking about a club that's had so little of it over the last 10 years. And I'm not trying to just tell people to be positive for the sake of it. My perspective is, wow, I really saw the power of what we all did together on the same page. And in a world where being negative and toxicity and drama and looking for what's wrong can, in a really weird and like dark way, unite people, like you have a choice. And I think what we have right now with this team, particularly on the journey to the first premiership in this biggest drought in the club's history, like, it's less about winning the flag almost and more about the journey of how we united again to get there. And I really do feel that power and what it could do in helping the team on grand final day. That's the truth.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, if I go into a little bit of like, if looking at the birth charts of all of the teams, I can see based on the astrology that we've had in the past and the ones that are coming in the future, and the reaction of all of the teams within their energy spaces, it's Carlton's energies are very significantly different to a lot of the other teams. So when you look at a birth chart, it's got like 12 placements on one side, 12 on the other, and each of those goes through evolution. If you look at kind of every version of yourself that you would want to do self-introspection on, like I'm going to do a check on my ego, do a check on my emotional state, do a check on how I want to build relationships, right? So everything kind of has a category. And so a lot of people, we work through these situations, these traumas in our lives, these, positive moments, how we react to them, loss, gain, all of these things, and they help us evolve as our spirit as people, with the end goal being, our most abundant future. And so as we each take these lessons, you can kind of track that with the energy of the universe. And so looking at the birth charts of the Carlton players, so much of their internal spaces have evolved versus their external. So they have evolved themselves internally throughout all of this trauma, and they're moving now into a space of being able to let that shine, this growth that they've had. And you can see that in a lot of the players who we say stuff about, like, he stepped into his leadership, he stepped into his confidence. Those are the players that have had all of this internal stuff evolve. And so then you can look at other teams and Collingwood, because they've got very interesting birth charts as well, but it is more the opposite kind of space, where they've got this idea of what they are externally, but there's still a lot of internal kind of evolution that needs to come, that they're working towards. And so it's almost like most of the other teams are in that energy of having this external idea of what they want to look like, but having not faced a lot of the internal issues that we all have to face in order to reach this end goal. And so watching Carlton come through this and be given, Vossi, and like watching the energy shift and us all being connected to this one thing, we're all doing that internal work. We're all shifting these spaces inside of us to find a more positive way to move forward. And having Carlton be your kind of backing energy and watching them as an example of being able to do that, and then seeing the fans uplift that, it changes the world. And that positive energy that you're talking about, that is really hard to get to when you come from that kind of negative disappointment, that's why it's so hard to get to, because it's almost like having to reprogram yourself. And so many people are able to do that through AFL, through having Carlton as their team, because it's this generational trauma that they are pulling themselves out of to try and find some sort of confident place to stand there and say, we're going to win. Like everyone's so tentative about saying, oh, maybe we can win, because they're all harboring these, like, they're trying to keep that little place safe, that held all of that trauma. And it's so nice. Just watching your fan cams alone from last year to this year is like just a stunning example of human evolution in the way of moving from a negative to a positive mindset. Watching people really become a little bit more confident with saying, you know what, I think we've got what it takes, instead of going, oh, I hope we can do it. It's sort of making that shift. And it's not an easy energy to move to. It's not. That's why it's 3 steps forward and 2 steps back.
Amen to that. Yeah, it's been remarkable watching those, one by one, those reactions shift from, can we, can't we, to will we, won't we. And that's been the big one. I mean, it's taken 6 years of doing this to get to this point now, but we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens. Hey, this has been a phenomenal chat. You weren't lying when you said it was the most unique way that you became a supporter. This has been the most unique Carlton People episode I think we've done.
Yeah, I'm weird.
Aren't we all? Aren't we all?
Yes.
We are
Yes,
all
we
a little
are.
bit weird in our own unique way. And I think it's really cool that we get to, document as many individuals in this Carlton community, as we can. So I guess I have to finish off with the same question. I mean, when do the boys lift up the next cup? Is it this year? Is it soon?
I think it's this year. Astrologically, if they tap into the energy they are being given, I think the universe wants them to have it. I think as a gift to them, as a reward, as a thank you for the way that they have helped change the collective mindset and for the lessons that they've learned, that they've helped teach other people. I think it's this year. If they tap into the right energy, it's available to them.
Well, it will be an extremely magical
Yeah,
documentation of the history of the Carlton Football Club if it is
absolutely.
this year. It really will
Hmm.
be. Yeah, look, thanks again for coming on. It's been an
My
absolute
pleasure.
pleasure to have you and to connect, and go Blues.
Go Blues.